Nice to have one of those tonight. Now, I'm just trying to text him now. Is he up? Okay, so I'm going to slide over and we are going to try to call him and see if this works. Now, I'm going to be talking in Papatar. He's going to be responding in Papatar. I'm going to have Lori do some translation so you can see what's going on. And I tried to put some questions that I think I'm going to ask in English, and I'll highlight those as we go so you know what I'm saying as well. Hey, Tazin. Bila naman lantam. Utala binahada dayaw.
Ha?
Utala binahada dayaw?
Yawa dati manugu.
Bilay.
He can hear him. He said, "Can you hear me?" He said, "I can hear you."
Okay, tahud. Yani wala wara ringim lorima wengi talabe na nas ye mana nasira mata na yabarma.
Okay, so he's going to try to pull me into the phone call as well so that he can see you all. I'm going to try to turn the camera around so that you
Why
all
don't you
can.
turn your mute? Yo, Tazin tahud. Matel Kiskai, Iowa. No province in yala Kiskistana. Ma yasit beinu hinawase mahet. Tano hinsana tano num hahin, ma ira num bulu, ma taise dia tira tunan, ma ira buluna hahin beoheum.
Yo tahu dari na sana nung guahin ne keren ma leun matikair nugu bulu yo airwa bulu datunan ma ihat ni nasik.
Okay, so he said Aaron asked him to tell you what the name of his wife is and about his kids. So he told you that his wife's name is Karen and that he has 2 sons. One was just born 3 weeks ago. And he has 4 daughters.
Yo, Tazin, kaiken monu kis tano taman napanta, ma ogusen be ukis tika masige.
Yo ma aken yaw sen ba metal ki siring diet ligba ora kikinista no kinkinister youths yo mon celebration tano independent ma siri kutusen no kinkinis katin ay kulabung tano our celebrating no independence ta Papua New Guinea.
Okay, so what he's telling, Aaron asked him, he said, "Where are you? And what are you doing?" And so he said, "We are together with the youth in the church, and we got together to do a little youth conference because Independence Day is coming up. And so we're celebrating independence together and doing some Bible study."
Yeah, and September 15th is independence. It'll be 50 years of independence for Papua New Guinea. Sembe uga hinawase yao be katin. So it's Saturday morning there, 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. Hinawase yao be kaikan ramalanra bung tagoro. Muta na kis wara gyuti kalinga mamarakan ma utalibena yanga palay dahin tiyakan.
Yo tahu no kinkinis gor hanuat katin yo kinkinis ter youths ma akain panta wara kis meri youths kain panta te kara weekend ma next weekend wara kis res bomb so eru bung taguro masade kai ma anong be next week taguro masade ares bomb.
So today and tomorrow, they're with the youth that live up on the mountain, the church on the mountain that Kyung moved to and ended up planning a church there. So this weekend is the weekend for the youths up on the mountain. And then next week on Saturday and Sunday, he's going to be leading the youth that live on the coast at the original church.
Ay, Tazin no num haki niya kan?
Ay nanuguahin niya kan.
How many?
Merikis.
Ay, Karen did Bila naman lang tam.
So this is his wife, Karen.
Taud, mayra bulu he.
Erwo dir hanwara akis tika tano holiday o dir holiday mata no school tika mano dir papu ma irero ansik tika mano tamat dal no tamat tikis res na taiken.
Okay, so 2 of their kids went down to stay with their grandparent for the weekend, and then the 2 youngest and the oldest, are they right there with them? Are there with them?
Tazin taud, tigalinge yaw si be Lamar's Bible Church no hinsana no sioskai, diet na palay be amon sina sari mahetala be na sasarin tu pas god tana tamuta taman be tano sios.
Aaron just asked how you, the church, could be praying for the church in Papatar.
Tamo mira sinasaring ni liligwara bemot tale bemot na war magot taine no luena uta no burena I kistarum tano lesson 37 no arosur ta no dis galang-alangan no peng-peng yo so no arosur ta no burena yaw ang sibena patam timan yo tika ma adiating de kiskis ta no burena.
Okay, so the first one he wants you to pray about is that he's going through the evangelistic teaching with a group, and they're on lesson 37 of how many?
50.
Of 50. So they're getting near the end, and he really wants to end this well and do a good job with it. So if you could pray for him about that.
Masama?
No erwo monta no kabatenan nur kai yo upalay tarbe sigar kabatenan nurie ma amon itula tunan dala tahun wara gilpin palim tika mayaw tano sai tano burena ora tarahusur tano burena ma wara amon artabari tahun bena nines kilam senbe yape wara kilam tus
So he's saying that to pray for the church there, to pray for the believers. There are some that are new believers. There are also 3 that are helping him in the work that he's training and discipling right now. And they're coming along in their understanding and in helping him well.
Yo, mantiga mas mabe.
And is there something else?
No no conference New Island
He would also like for you to pray for the other churches in New Ireland. They need your prayers too.
Yo. Tazin, tigan mas natin be no num milon mano num no loan to no num family mesting het I mesting nalua in taita missionary kana ma I meso he katin na muute in ira missionary dia ka hanwat.
Yo ni ngoken be yo nalwa yaw ga metal miri kis narkomantere lotu ma no lueni nasik ga nugahin ga kahay ma metal taman kis bak no lotu kita ngoken be mon kebere nur nur ko mang dari kingilan bilbilay yo ma met paga nur tusta jes waralon so ya kano no tuwe na kinkinis tano hatahun tano nugutinolen mananugahin manolweni nasik para komandano lotu at lotu.
So before the missionaries came, they were in a religious group, and they call it a lotu. And they were in a religious group, and he said that they didn't really.
It was built on works.
It was built on what you do, not on who you believe in or who you're trusting to save you. And so their life before was a lot different, and they were trying to work their way to heaven.
Sen be namura 2008 tagu yo ya ira daw ka kapalay no taud ni ninawas manas kilambe yawa tete si kena ya pegarwat benigil tegelinga ora halon yaw ma yaw ga nurnur to no pinapalim jis ke gile ora halon yaw 2008 ma namur no gahin ma ka kapno araw sur to no nyanga tago 2011 ma ga somah no nurnur ta jis ora halon
So
so
he's
ma no pa nabung mirga raut ma bulu ma no last mo no ma baby ken ma ispebe na tamat manak kaptiman mano taut na ina itu lawik mo bata.
So he said, as of 2008, he heard the truth and he heard the gospel, and he realized that he was a sinner and that he had need of Jesus and that Jesus died for his sins, and he put his trust in that to save him from his sin.
That was the first time we were able to present the gospel. He was in that group.
He was in the first group where we presented the gospel. And then he was saying 2011, Karen also joined him as a believer, trusting in what Christ did on the cross for her. And I really struggled with the last part. Can
And
you help
since
me?
then, each of their kids have trusted Christ as well. There's a big gap until the last one. And now their last one has come along, is just 3 weeks old, and their prayer is that he will grow up and trust Christ as well. So
Yeah.
does he?
Kakenum yo 2018 metal ga hanut mares na test maano siyos res na test gatule metal ora kilya kan outreach yo ma metal ga antalur ya missionary tikam ma ano siyos res na test ma kis kaya kahit ya karataman ma 2019 liman matikay relwe ng kabaten na nunur ma tuke namon halingin balin isya balin. So dit pe mga halingin tu sen be mon bilay na winawas tira tena nurnur wara balore diet ma no bure na balin iya tahon be hutet na patap.
Okay, so he said in 2018, they left the coast and they moved up on the mountain, and that's whenever they started the outreach up there.
They were sent by the church.
They were sent by the church up to the mountain to do an outreach up there. And in 2019, there were 6 believers. And they've continued to grow since then. And there's still not a lot of believers, but there's a good group of them. And now they're doing the evangelistic teaching yet again, and hoping that the Lord leads more to become believers.
Yo. Tahut ma tazino lastin ribe amon mestan yanga usip be no sios kai ayawa diet na palaitana be usip na yanga dahin mehet guti ka study tano bugdenyo be tiga mestan linge usip na yanga palayum te diet.
Yo Simon yo tiga lingamon ni tangokan be no pinapalim tano wato ang harwat mano tintaw tagot kay yo ko beni tanga be kain New Island be Papua New Guinea pe upalay be pega tamat na lingat ano ni asma tere tuno sen be tau tagot be waratu tira lilikta muat be ira ponponiana yo si haligin ri sigar bulu sigar nasi kay mutal taman kanwat ma sigara tinolen mutal ma pagamanga palay tananumet ninanasen be namur palay utano pinapalim tano to be amon tamat sunupi sakit tano ulahano tano pinapalim tano warahan mano tawt ni hinawas apostol 1:8 hinawas so maayan na nugwaragat be mehet mga kaptamat na rakta nonos na skilam taya kano ininawas Jesus gatar tira apostol ma alingin nira missionary hoy mutal taman mairamas na missionary ang detis tira sa country ya war murya kano hinawas ma alingin nira tayo nanunur deta hatanwat tira tamtaman sen be tamat na sunupi baka na kay Papua New Guinea kay New Island ya pala be alingin bayra tribe tayo ta missionary or lakatay so anitang okan be ing be mon sinisip be amon hartulat ano agot utano no pinapalim yo mga taut wara taramat god ma murat no tintaw ma hartula wara tarno taut ni nawas ta sige dia tindet pe nurba ba ingdiet na nurnur ma.
So that's a lot. Go ahead.
So he said, hey, look, he said, we're not a big deal. We're not a lot of people here in New Ireland, but God did send us missionaries, and he sent us Aaron and Lori when they were young, when they were newly married. And he said they brought us the good news. And there's other missionaries, other places, and all over the world that are bringing the good news, and that's really good. He said, I do want you to think about the fact that there are still a lot of people groups in Papua New Guinea that do not have missionaries and have not had a chance to hear the gospel. And he's challenging you all to think if God would want you to go. That's some of it.
Good job.
No,
Tazin.
kano da kunan inawas manat naragat wara tanga taut tago ta alinginira missionary dia santalur Amerika ma raut na Papua New Guinea sen dia teman-teman sudah takanong mo.
He's saying he wants you to know that he is so very thankful for all the missionaries who have come from America to go all around the world. And he's so thankful for all the missionaries that have come to Papua New Guinea too. He wants you to know that there is still a need.
And he did mention earlier the Great Commission, that they believe that all of their little world in New Ireland, all the people groups, there's 21 people groups in that island, that they know the gospel, and wants to challenge you guys to consider the need around the world as well. Tazin Taut, I'm going to have you guys wave at Tokyung and Karen. Taut, the tanawar namor. Kaya.
Kaya.
So that was Tokyung. He was one of our first believers. He's one of the pastors or elders in one of the two churches, and a faithful man. If you pick up the book Tales from the Tribe, the very first chapter is about one of our believers that was scared to go with me to another people group because he thought he would die. That's this guy here. So as we get into it, can I just, this isn't in my script, but can I have one of you in the audience stand and just pray for Tokyung and his family and some of those things that were mentioned? All right. Well, that's a little bit of our world over the last 24 years. We're going to continue in our series, Faithful to the One Who Calls. Well, last Sunday was When Your World is Rocked. Yesterday was When Danger is Imminent. Tonight is When the World Parties. I'm going to start, we've been looking at a passage from Jeremiah each night. Jeremiah 29:11, perhaps one of the most famous verses of Jeremiah. Can anyone tell me what Jeremiah 29:11 is about? For I know the plans I have for you, a future and a hope. Remember this? You often see this on graduation cards, right? Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. We often give it to people. You see it on bumper stickers. You see it quoted when people are in the hospital or when they've gone through a tough part. That's a future and a hope. It's a great promise, but a lot of times people have no idea what the sentence before it says. And that's Jeremiah 29:10. This is God, Yahweh, talking to Jeremiah. And he says this, for thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you. And I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. And I've often wanted to get a graduation card and put, God has a future and plan for you in 70 years. Just hang on. Because often we think this thing is instant, right? He's got a future and a hope, and tomorrow it's going to happen. And if it doesn't, something's wrong. And yet when it doesn't, we have God's faithfulness and his promises. And Isaiah was written 150 years before the events of tonight took place. And we're going to look at Isaiah. Jeremiah was written during this time, and Daniel, we know, got a copy of the book of Jeremiah, and he was reading it and saw that there were 70 years, and he was praying that God would fulfill, I almost spoke in Pop Guitar, God would fulfill his promises in that time. And that's what he did. Faithful to the one who calls when the world parties. We're skipping over Daniel 4. This was actually written by King Nebuchadnezzar himself, the chapter in the Bible written by an evil king. I believe that he actually was saved later in life. After his 7 years living like a cow out in the pasture, God humbled him. He wrote Daniel 4. We're going to refer to that. This is well after that time. Nebuchadnezzar has passed away. His son-in-law has taken the throne. Most likely it was his son-in-law. And then he went to another part of the world to oversee the wider nation. And his son, Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, took over. Daniel had been in Babylon by the time Daniel chapter 5 rolls around for 66 years. And he would have been in his early 80s. And you can imagine, if you believe that this verse, God has a future and a hope for you, was for today, imagine the disappointment after spending your whole life under this regime and not getting able to see the promises you thought God had for you. And yet, he knew that it's not tomorrow. In God's frame, it's in his timing, and he will be faithful. And so I am going to be faithful to him. So Daniel chapter 5 verse 1 says this. King Belshazzar made a great feast, this is the grandson, for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. During this time, he had been on the throne in this city, this capital city of 200,000 people for about 14 years. Second in command because his dad, the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, was the true king, but he didn't live there in Babylon. And he had been well protected in these huge walls that ranged anywhere from 60 foot to, in places, up to 300 foot, 30 foot wider or wider, double walls. If you made it over that one, you'd have to go down the next one and then up the other one. It was impenetrable. Kind of like the Titanic was unsinkable, right? And he felt comfort. And during this time, the Medes and the Persians were gaining ground, and they were coming closer. And Belshazzar knew they were outside the city walls. But instead of being worried and protecting and taking steps, he was throwing parties. I want to look at some facts of Belshazzar. And then we're going to look at some facts about Daniel and how they differ. Belshazzar partied rather than protected. While the enemies were outside of the gate, his responsibility as the king on the throne there was to look after his people. The king above him, the true king, had given this responsibility. In this position, you're to protect these people. But instead, he threw a massive party, called 1,000 of his lords in. The wine was flowing. Second thing is this: he praised the gods of the world. Let's continue reading in Daniel chapter 5, verses 2 through 4. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and silver that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, here it says father, but most likely it was his grandfather, kind of like Father Abraham, you could call him father going way back, had taken out of the temple of Jerusalem. Do you remember Daniel 1 and 2? When Nebuchadnezzar went into Jerusalem and took the captives, it put in that odd verse that he also took vessels from the temple of the Lord and put them in the temple of his gods. Now, 66 years later, here's why that was in Daniel 1 and 2. And I told you on Sunday that these vessels were the bookends of the Babylonian rule over Israel. Nebuchadnezzar came in and took them. Belshazzar takes him out of the temple, and this is what he does with him. He commanded that they be brought, that the kings and his lords, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords, his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Belshazzar was mixing a little bit of the true God identity with those vessel cups that the priests were supposed to drink from with his own belief system. And we call that syncretism. Tokyung on the phone tonight, he mentioned that I was in a religious group, a Lotu. For over 100 years, Christianity has been in Papua New Guinea. Actually, if you look at the Joshua report, it says that New Guinea is 98% Christian. That's because it's not Hindu, it's not Muslim. They would say they're Christian. And yet the gospel isn't there. They live in animistic syncretism. I want to show you something from India. This is a picture of a church in India that has syncretized Jesus with the Hindu religion. Taken a little bit of Christianity and mixed it in. One of those Lotus that Tokyung was talking about was started in a neighboring tribe about 6 hours north of us. And there's two arrows, one's pointing to a man on the ground in a blue shirt. He was to be the new pastor of this Lotu. The man in the green on the stage that the other arrow is pointing to, that was the local sorcerer. And at the opening of this grand opening, the pastor came to pray over it, to ask that God and his angels would protect it. And the sorcerer was there to talk to ancestral spirits and to drive away any bad demons. What they're doing is taking a little bit of Christianity with their own religion and just trying to cover all their bases without a true understanding of the true God. In our village, Catholicism has been there a long time. And the Catholic Church has actually encouraged the act of syncretism, where they say, go ahead and include these things. So you'll see the church with the Catholic heart on it, or the cross there planted in different people's yards that they believe will help them and help their gardens grow. But then, that Y-shaped branch in front of it, that's a traditional thing that they put in order for the bad spirits to not be able to get in. And so they want to protect Jesus. They want to protect the cross. And they put that Y there so the bad spirits can't get in. And yet our God is a holy God, a jealous God. There is no God except him. And when the world takes its beliefs, its false religions, and merges them with Christianity, that is not Christianity. That is syncretism, and those are lies. And for years, Tokyung, who we were talking with, went to the Lothu, but he was also known as the witch doctor. And he specialized in black magic. Now, black magic is the kind that harms people. And so he would be paid to work these spells and things to cause the ocean to get rough so that people would end up sinking their canoe and drowning. Or he would work these spells so that people would get sick and die. And he used the powers of the ancestral spirits and the forest spirits while going to Lothu and trying to do the right thing so that the white man's God was happy and the spirits that he controlled were happy. And it wasn't until 2008 when he heard the gospel, the true gospel of Jesus Christ, that he finally forsook all of those things and trusted Christ alone. When syncretism was taking place with Belshazzar and his thousands using the temple vessels, in Daniel chapter 5, verses 5 and 6, we read, "Immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way and his knees knocked together." Now God's got his attention. He was partying. He was praising the gods of the world. And that was enough. The 70 years is coming up close. And it's actually going to be cut off 4 years early to allow the Medes and the Persians to come in, to allow a king by the name of Cyrus to come in to fulfill God's promise. This human hand, which was the hand of God, wrote on the wall. What did Belshazzar do? Verse 7, "Then the king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, 'Whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler of the kingdom.'" Why? Because dad's number one. He's off in another place. I'm number two here. You're going to be next in line. What was Belshazzar's solution? It was prizes and possessions. That's what Belshazzar was trusting in. When he got in a situation when it was tough, now it's prizes and possessions that I'm going to trust in. I need help, and I'll give a prize to whoever. I got these possessions that I can offer. And he was standing on his wealth and his position and thought that that would make a difference for his kingdom. I want us to get the character of Belshazzar. Well, when this happened, notice Daniel wasn't around. He was one of the nobles that had been brought in. He had been given a place of predominance. He was one of the wise men that was consulted. But for years now, Belshazzar hadn't included him. And among the 1,000 lords, maybe he had gotten an invitation to the party. We don't know. But he wasn't there. And yet, when this came up, and no one could solve it, the queen mother, which is probably the widow of Nebuchadnezzar, said, "Belshazzar, listen, there's a guy. When your grandpa, when your father couldn't figure out a dream, he was called in, and the God gave him the interpretation. Let's call him. So Belshazzar did that. I want us to skip down to verse 13 to 16 to see what happened. It says that Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I have heard of you, and that your spirit of the gods is in you, and that the light of understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and to make known its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Daniel was brought in. "Daniel, I've heard that you can do this. I've heard that you have the spirit of the gods with you. I've heard that you're enlightened. I've heard that you can solve mysteries. Will you? You'll be third in command, right behind me." But Daniel hadn't succumbed to the world pleasures for those 66 years of his life in Babylon. He wasn't in it for the position. He wasn't in it for the desires of the flesh. In his position, his status, he could have gotten whatever he wanted to fulfill his flesh. And yet, he had been faithful to the one who calls. It was during these 14 years of Belshazzar's reign that Daniel chapter 7, 8, and 9 were written, which are prophetic visions that have the most prophecies in one place anywhere in the Bible that have been fulfilled. God entrusted to Daniel something much more precious than power in Babylon. Entrusted him with world events and prophecies that we get to read today. He was called into the scene. Now I want to jump over to Daniel. I know we haven't finished Belshazzar, but Daniel, a couple things about him. First, he was publicly known for his testimony. Had to be reminded, but he was known. Oh yeah, you're that guy that the spirit of the gods, they didn't fully understand. But you're different. You have understanding, you have wisdom. He was known for his public testimony. Second thing is this, he prioritized the spiritual over the material. How did he respond when Belshazzar said, "You can be third. We'll dress you in purple, give you gold chain, you'll be third in command"? Here was Daniel's response in verse 17. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation." I'm not interested in your stuff. Now, perhaps that's because he knew what was coming. He knew that Belshazzar wasn't going to be second in command for much longer. But Daniel wasn't interested in the possessions and prizes and things he could gain. Give that to other people. That's not what I'm here for. I can give you the interpretation. Ironically, he gained that position. We'll see that later. He was publicly known for his testimony. He prioritized the spiritual over the material. And third, he proclaimed the truth boldly. Daniel, now as a man in his early 80s, standing before this king, he didn't have to proclaim the truth, but now God had given this chance in front of a third king of Babylon to tell about the true God. 150 years earlier, Isaiah had written, and in that, he mentioned a specific name in chapter 45, verse 1. He said, "This is what the Lord says to Cyrus, who was the new and upcoming king of Persia that was going to take over in just a couple years. His anointed one, whose right hand he will empower, before him mighty kings like Belshazzar will be paralyzed with fear. Their fortress gates will be opened, never to be shut again. And they were outside the gates. God named this king 150 years before he appeared. In the next chapter in Isaiah, look at those names: Bel and Nebo, the gods of Babylon. Named after who? Or who was named after them? Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar. When it's referring to Bel and Nebo, it's referring to the gods, but it's also referring to those kings, Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar. The gods of Babylon bow as they are lowered to the ground. They are being hauled away on ox carts. The poor beasts stagger under the weight. But what's the chapter preceding these two prophecies that God had given 150 years earlier? Was this: do not tremble, do not be afraid. Did I not proclaim my purposes for you long ago? You are my witnesses. Is there any other God? No, there is no other rock, not one. How foolish are those who manufacture idols. These prized objects are really worthless. The people who worship idols don't know this, so they are all put to shame. Daniel was living in light of this chapter. Don't you know why I preserved you and kept you? Because you're supposed to be my witnesses. Because they're believing in idols and they don't know the truth. Is there another God? No. And you get to tell them about the true rock, the true king, the true God. That's why I preserved you. Daniel, you've been faithful for 66 years, and now you get to stand. And the words of God that have been written have been able to be fulfilled as you stand there and boldly proclaim him. But guess what? Daniel's not alone. He wasn't in a unique spot that he got these words and nobody else does, because 2 Corinthians 4:4 says this: the God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Today, the God of this world, Satan, has blinded the eyes of so many with all this syncretism and these lies and these other religions. And they don't know the truth. And Acts 1:8 is to us, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Daniel had the privilege to be a witness to Belshazzar and the 1,000 lords of Babylon. And you have that same privilege, to be his witness to a world that is inundated with lies and deception and idols and false religion. Daniel was publicly known for his testimony. He prioritized the spiritual over the material, and he proclaimed the truth boldly. Look at verse 20. Daniel goes back, and he refers to his grandpa, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar's grandpa, about the time when he was full of pride and saying, look at this great city that I had built. And he had built a great city. And he was puffed up. And God struck him down. And for 7 years, he lived as a wild animal. Until he was humbled. And it says he looked to the God of heaven and humbled himself. And God allowed him to have a chapter in the Bible. And Daniel recounts that now. And then in verse 20, he says, but when Nebuchadnezzar's heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. Skipping down to verse 22, and you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled yourself, your heart. Though you knew all this, you knew the story, but you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven. And the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and you and your lords and wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hands is your breath, and who are all your ways, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. Belshazzar, the God who gives you breath, you've not honored. In fact, you've used his vessels to worship idols made of wood, iron, and brass. And you've exchanged the glory of the true God for the things of this world. And you're doing it with pride. You knew the lesson. Belshazzar, you're full of pride. Verse 25. And this is the writing that was inscribed: Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. These were actually Arabic. The people of Babylon in their trade language could actually read this. It was measured, weighed, divided. But they didn't know, why does it say measured, weighed, divided? Daniel gives the interpretation. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered your days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Belshazzar, the writing's on the wall. You've heard that phrase, right? The writing's on the wall. What's it mean? This is the end of the road. Writing's on the wall. It's over. Story's done. Where does it come from? Daniel chapter 5. Belshazzar, writing's on the wall. Your days are numbered. You're found wanting. It's divided to the Medes and Persians. Why? Because he partied rather than protected. He praised the gods of the world. He was all about prizes and possessions, and he was full of pride. Daniel, on the other hand, was publicly known for his testimony. He prioritized the spiritual over the material. He proclaimed the truth boldly. And I may have to jump back. Perfect. Thank you, guys. And he was promoted and protected. Let's read what happens. Daniel 5:29 through 31. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed in purple and chain of gold put around his neck, even though he didn't want it. And proclamation was made about him that he should be third ruler in the kingdom. Meanwhile, history tells us that the Medes had diverted the river that ran under the walls to another location, and they were marching as an army while the Babylonians were partying under the gates, under the walls of that city. And that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, the king of Babylon, was killed. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Here's the difference in these two men, Belshazzar and Daniel. The question I want to ask us is to look at our lives, and which one do we reflect? Are we like Daniel in all four of those? Or do we tend to be a little bit more like Belshazzar in some? And my question is, if we're starting to look like Belshazzar, may God allow his word to show that life, the writing is on the wall. That's the end of the story. You can party as much as you want. You can gain as many possessions as you want. You can be the king of your world. But if it's not the right side with Daniel, the writing's on the wall. And I wonder, in those 14 years, if Belshazzar had had the opportunity to reflect on his grandpa's life. I wonder if he had had the opportunity to summon in Daniel. I wonder if there were other Babylonians that had been, or other people from Judah that had been around to give testimony. And if Belshazzar had listened, if things would be different that night. And my friends, the reality is there are millions. 1 out of every 3 in the world are yet to hear about the name of Jesus and the gospel of Christ. And there are many that are living like Belshazzar. And the writing is on the wall for them. And I wonder if tonight we'd be willing to examine our own lives, but even look at if God would have us be a Daniel and be a witness and maybe even go to another nation. I was doing research on old people that started into church planting missions. That's the search I was doing. And it pulled up Ted and Peggy Fletcher and said they were 48 years old when they started. Now, I'm 48, so when I did that search on old people that started, wasn't quite sure what to think. Ted and Peggy Fletcher. At the age, he was in the Marines. And I believe in the 1950s, while serving in the Marines, a young man by the name of Billy Graham came and presented the gospel to the Marine group. And Ted was there. And he said, that night I thought that Billy Graham gave the wrong words because he said, if you men surrender to Jesus Christ. And I thought, who is he talking to? Marines, that the last thing we will do is surrender. But God used that and began working in his life. And through that and later testimony of the gospel, he was saved. He went on to work on Wall Street and other large corporations. And as he went into his 40s, he began to put out tracts at his work and tell people about Jesus. But he couldn't get out of his mind the fact that some people had never heard. And one day, and that's a picture of his Bible, in 1976, he read from Psalm 3, verse 8. It says, ask me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance. And he took that as a word from the Lord that he should go to the nations. And so he and his wife began to apply for different mission boards. And because they were in their 40s and because they hadn't had much Bible training, they were denied from several mission boards. And so someone said, why don't you start your own? So in 1979, he started a group in his basement, and then it was called World Evangelism Outreach. Today, it's known as Pioneers. And at the age of 48 and moving into his 50s, he and his wife went overseas and then began sending others and launched this. And I bring it up because here's the reality. Some of you have the opportunity to still be like Daniel at the age of 80-something to present the testimony of the true God to a foreign people. Or to be like Ted and Peggy Fletcher, who Ted said, why should some hear the life-giving message many times before some have had the chance to hear it once? And maybe you've never considered that for yourself because you considered it years ago, but that time has passed. And yet, I believe in the God of Daniel and that he could use you even in a second career. And again, for those who remain here, will we be like Daniel? Will we be different from the Belshazzars of this world? Father, I thank you for the time you've given us. Thank you that we have the opportunity to serve the God who made the universe and everything in it, the God that gives breath, the God that knows the future and has everything perfectly planned. It may take 70 years to work out some of your promises, or 150 years, but you are faithful. And may we, God, be faithful to the one who calls, even when the world parties. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.